All right, my phone says 5 o'clock and I think everyone's here. So let's go ahead and call this meeting to order on February 23rd. My name is Sean Eystone. Welcome you all here tonight. With us tonight, we have Directors Clausen, Eastham, Etsy, Godwin, Malone, and Williams, and Superintendent Matt Degner, Recording Secretary Kim Colvin, and several other folks. So I'm glad you all could join us tonight. I always try and think of, some wonderful opening to welcome everybody here. And the only thing I could think of as I was walking my dog earlier was that I believe the last time we met, it was about 70 degrees colder, which is, Iowa for you. So enjoy the sun and warmth. And I'm glad you could spend some time with us tonight. So first up in our agenda is our community comment. If you would like to make comments and speak with us tonight, you can use the raise hand feature and I will call on you and Kim will give you your rights to speak for 4 minutes. We have a small but mighty crowd there attending. So if anybody's interested, please raise your hand. All right, I do not see any hands up, so let's go ahead and move on. The next thing is our agenda approval, so I would entertain a motion for that.
I move that we approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open.
I'm an I vote, Kim.
Thank you, Director Clausen. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, we can move on to the consent agenda. Were there any comments or questions after folks looked at the bills? I didn't have any myself.
I reviewed the bills as well and I didn't have any.
Anyone else? No? All right. I'm going to pull item 17, the appendix 9. Are there any other items that directors would want to pull for discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion minus item 17.
I move that we approve consent agenda minus item 17.
Second.
All right, Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open.
Also an I vote. I'm not sure why it's not letting me log in.
Thank you. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you, Kim. I pulled appendix 9. There's an item on there that I think we might want to not approve tonight, but I'm going to throw it over to Matt or Dwayne to talk about it. It's the Lemmy item, I believe.
Right, and I'll let Dwayne go ahead and address the issue with the Lemmy part of Appendix 9 there. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to do that. Frankly, we're having some issues with the contractor, Lemmy, and we haven't resolved this one particular issue that this change order addressed. And so in light of that, I just felt better if we pulled it and we'll approve it at a later date.
So then you're asking us to just approve everything in appendix 9, but the Lemmy item.
That's correct, Ruthina.
That's correct.
All right. Any other questions on that item? All right, I would entertain the motion for appendix 9 minus the Lemmy change request.
So moved.
Second.
All right, Kim?
Online voting is open.
I'm an I vote, Kim.
Thank you. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
Okay, thank you, Kim. All right, we move on to a public hearing and I will toss it over to Director Malone.
Now is the time and place for the public hearing on the proposed plans and specifications for the City High window replacement project. The Board of Directors set the date for this public hearing on February 9th, 2021. Notice of public hearing was published in the Iowa City Press Citizen on February 10th, 2021. The district will receive bids on this project at 2 p.m. March 9th, 2021 at the physical plant located at 1137 South Riverside Drive, Iowa City, Iowa 52246. Notice to contractors was published as required by law in multiple statewide plan rooms and on the Iowa City Community School District website on February 10th, 2021. Are there any questions from the board? Are there any questions from the public? If so, please raise your hand.
All right. Looks like not, so we will close the public hearing. Thanks, Ruthina, I appreciate it. Let's move on into our discussion items and go into our return to learn update. Matt?
Good evening again, everybody. Thanks. Yes, we'll dive right into return to learn. I think I'd like to start with a couple pieces of good news. The first one, we'd like to graciously thank the foundation for their support again of the district this week. They've officially donated $270,000 or close to $270,000 to support the district's use of Lexia and Dreambox. And so that obviously has been a big assistance for us. And so we're thankful to Susan and her board and her team that were able to raise that funds, and to the community at large for supporting that. That's been a key tool for us as we've navigated the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you to them. Another piece of good news that you may have saw in district communications this week is that we plan to have all of our staff receive the first vaccination by the end of this week, or all staff that has signaled that they would like the vaccine by the end of this week. So that would take us through tiers 3, 4, and 5, and really puts us in a position to have the staff through their second dose of vaccination by March 26th. And so we're excited and very thankful again for our partners in that work, Johnson County Public Health and the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. It's a very slick process. Staff members are able to get in and out. And Kristen and Chase have been doing a tremendous job of scheduling our team of folks to get in there and really navigating that well. So I think that's great news for us in the district on that front, and should be a big assurance to our staff that we're able to get through that process that quickly. Another health and safety component that I want to update you on tonight, obviously that new CDC guidance for reopening schools or opening schools was out. Really, it kind of reaffirms our commitment to a lot of the best practices that we've been employing, whether it's through our hybrid model or now in our 100% learning environment. Distancing obviously continues to be the biggest challenge if we run into a challenge in some spots. It does mention double masking, and obviously we make masks available for all staff and students, and they're encouraged to wear a double mask, but not required in our buildings. The other piece that the guidance talks about is the need to quarantine after having the vaccine. They talk about 10 days after the second dose of the vaccine, and so that's something we'll revisit for after the spring break time period. Just as I told you, we wouldn't have all of our staff through that until March 22nd, but we believe that also gives us some additional conversation to have around that point. Right now, we're continuing obviously with quarantines for people that would have received the first dose of the vaccine. As far as travel guidance, we shared that with you last week as far as that international travel component. So that was a piece I would just remind you about as well. But from a health and safety standpoint, I think we've kind of talked through those different efforts that we employed here for the first couple weeks of 100% learning. And I know we've had a lot of smiles in the buildings, a lot of positives from that, even though we navigate a lot of emotions and concern around bringing folks back in. And our county numbers look good right now. And so we're hopeful that with increased vaccine distribution and the continuation of learning here, that we can continue in a smooth fashion. But that's really the big summary I had around the health and safety component. Unless there's questions, I guess maybe one other item I just thought about here was Charlie's previously asked, or the board's previously asked about demographic data for a breakdown of COVID infection rates in the schools. And that's not something we have or have had the ability to track through our contact tracing process, but I did work with Sam at Johnson County Public Health this week, and the COVID-19 Iowa site seems to actually just been recently, I guess, more accurately updated in regards to that demographic breakdown. And so if you do go to that page and you click on Johnson County, right now you'll see we're at about a 4%, but you can see positive test by race, positive test by ethnicity on there. And you can see that what that breakdown looks like. So I think that's our best and most accurate source of data as I worked with Sam and Kristen, looking at what we've been able to do and then what the county's been able to do to answer that question. So anything along the health and safety end, vaccines or mitigation strategies wise, or anything with infection rates that I could answer here for you this evening?
I've got a comment and a question. My comment is, so everybody's clear, they changed how they're reporting positivity numbers last Thursday, right? So we had a 14-day positivity change from one day to the next from like 6.5 to 4.7, which is impossible, but it's because they changed how they're reporting it. So the numbers might look great, but it's comparing apples to oranges at this point. I don't know how else we deal with it. That's the number we're given to use, but that's why it looks so good. It is different number now. My question is, and I think you kind of spoke to it a little bit, Matt. Most folks are going to be questioning at this point the quarantine process, right? Kids that wanted and needed to be back in school are back in school until such time as they're not because of some sort of quarantine. And so that's the questions that are going to arise. Why are we doing it this way or that way? When are we going to change? There's been a couple folks asking about how do we better utilize our space? And so the question that I have is, do we have any like real available spaces in our schools? People have talked about there's got to be empty classrooms because teachers are teaching online, and I don't know that that's accurate, or at least it's not 100% accurate. So can you speak a little bit to, like, do we have spaces that we can do any real spacing?
Sure. The one thing I can say with great confidence is our principals have looked for every available space and tried to work out every available space with their staff and tried to think about how they could creatively break groups, but maintain cohorts when possible. Look at those common time areas as far as how to stagger passing times or lunch times. And so I don't think it would be fair to say that we're sitting on available space or that we haven't used available spaces in the buildings. I know that people hear ideas from maybe practices that other districts have tried and are wondering, is that something similar we're doing here? We vetted out all of those different conversations, all those different approaches to land on the ones we're at. And I think that's just been a consistent part of the work as we went along and has continued to evolve throughout the school year. It was generated a lot of conversation again, obviously, as we're bringing students back. But just because we have teachers online doesn't mean that we have available classrooms. Those classrooms are still being used. Students are still in those, staff are still in those. And so I think that's the best answer I could give you there, Sean. And again, I would just give a shout out to our principals and our building teams for thinking through all of those. That's when a lot of our administrative meetings have been on our Tuesdays when we get together with that group, is trying to problem solve those different issues and determining what the best way to use the space that is available to us in the most effective manner.
Thanks, Matt. I assume that was the case. I'm sure there could be a one-off, right, where some random place could do something different, right? But the majority is doing it as best it can. I think that's my point of bringing it up, was that's what the conversation is going to be, is what can we do different in order to not have kids have to go into quarantine that don't need to, and however we define don't need to, right, is its own question. So I just,
no, I think it's a good question. I think it's one we'll continue to, we'll continue to look at, Sean, around quarantining and our best procedure for that, and making sure that we're trying to be as fair on that as possible, because we know that's an issue when we do send staff or students home due to quarantine, and want to try to avoid that as as much as possible. And obviously we're starting to talk about it with some of our, typical spring events and celebrations and some of those components too. And so there's a lot of components to it that way. And I think conversation that we just have to continue to have to make sure we're doing the best and giving the best opportunity for everybody. I guess one other thing, that's what I was going to say too, was that we have asked principals if they needed additional assistance, that we would come out and walk buildings with them and try to help them problem solve those. And I know that some principals have taken up the ESC team on that, and then we've been out to the different sites and tried to help them problem solve that. So we've been doing that consistently here too, again, with the transition to 100%. But good and fair question, and I think one we continue to answer to parents or to staff when we get to that quarantine time period.
Along those lines, Matt, I think I know the answer to this question too, but I just want to make sure. As the CDC pushes out new guidelines and guidance on safely reopening schools, such as cohorting and potting and all that stuff, does our Health and Safety Committee review those new guidelines or updated guidelines and to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to reduce the things that Sean was talking about, like quarantine times?
Yeah, I mean, Kate could talk about specifically about the process they use, but that is every time there's new guidance, the team looks at that and sees where maybe our guidance is not matching it or where it could be improved. And Kate, is there anything you'd want to add on that component from your direct work with that health and safety team?
No, I would just mention that we did review all of the CDC guidelines to make sure we were compliant with those and that they're represented in the Return to Learn plan that's on our website.
And again, I'll just say it here publicly, again, that Return to Learn guide's been updated and is on the website. So if folks have questions about what those specific procedures are, that is posted on the website and has been updated as of our transition 100% learning and the receipt of these new guidelines. I think oh, sorry, Charlie.
Well, yeah. In terms of our adherence to the new CDC guidelines, I understand that we're still, because of our space issues, we're not able to meet the CDC guidelines on physical distancing in many classrooms. Am I accurate in saying that?
Right. I think that's probably a fair assessment. There's going to be a lot of different opportunities throughout the school day where we would not be meeting a 6 feet social distance requirement. And that's why I kind of led with that one, that's probably the one out of the different list of them that we have the hardest time having consistent compliance with. But that was a recommendation. We know we had a requirement of 100% from the state to bring students back. And we did our best to work through our scenarios, just like we talked through here, to provide as many safety mitigation efforts as we can. But that distancing one, yeah, is the most difficult, Charlie.
I do have one question. Can you please remind us again what the process is in terms of who gets vaccinated first and who doesn't?
Sure. So the big requirements we used were we looked at age and then time on site were really how we broke down those first few tiers. Obviously now this week we've been able to really bunch what would have been tiers 3, 4, and 5 together. And so really the primary factor for tier 1 and tier 2 would have been that age of 50 or 50 plus and the time on site. And then we looked at the next group of 40 to 49 and their percentage of time on site. And then really, even though we broke it into those 3 other tiers, it's somewhat of a non-issue now this week since everybody's going in that next wave. And the next piece I was going to transition. Oh, sorry, JP. Did you
Thank you.
too?
I just wondered if that includes subs.
Yeah, so subs would have been identified into what would have been tier 5, but again, now we can almost look at this like we've been able to take everybody in tier 3, and that's what we wanted to do originally, was to try to, assuming that this would pick up, that we would receive additional vaccines, we wanted to be prepared and have it broken down into those further tiers, but knew if we got an influx of vaccines that we'd be able to collapse those tiers into a more readily available group.
Matt, if you don't mind, I'd just add 2 with the subs. And we did qualify it as people that were consistently working. So we kind of set a step as to, what it meant to be working in the district. So we had pulled, I forget what the ratio was, but there was some information related to that because there has been some questions from our subs that we've been navigating.
So thanks for that, guys. I know it's important to get that vaccine out to everybody, to our contracted employees, to our support staff, to our substitutes. And so we're really excited about this movement this week to be able to make that available to everybody. And we just thank our partners with that work again. The piece I was going to transition to, and we can definitely come back to health and safety, but would just be to remind folks of our principles around staffing. We spent a lot of time with you last week. Or the last time we met around how we staffed and tried to make this transition. And so I'm just going to ask Amy to jump in and review some of those guiding principles with you guys that we use to make those decisions. And then of course we could take any questions you might have around that as well.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to just have Nick share a little bit about where we're at with secondary staffing in a moment. And if you remember last time we talked about that any potential changes coming there, we're really going to hover around that third trimester time with our secondary folks. But we did our best to staff at the elementary level, forecasting out not only the students that we would see making transition on February 15th, but also at trimester time on March 11th. And what we shared last time was we shared just our raw numbers with how many kids were making that transition from online to on-site and vice versa at all three of our levels. And then specific to elementary, we had a slide that talked about during second trimester, we had roughly about 20 teacher changes. And I say roughly in there because there's a little bit of trickiness or with those numbers because at that same time we were dealing with some mid-year retirements there as well. And in comparison, the slide that we talked about with that third trimester transition, or really that transitioning that was happening for some of our students and staff on February 15th, was right around 13 teacher changes and then reassignment of 2 building subs. After that presentation, and as we continued to entertain late enrollment requests, we did add an additional teacher on site as well. So we're up to 14 at this point. And then speaking to the guiding principle. So we were trying to balance a lot as we entertained that work. And there was 4 key areas for us that we were working hard to keep in mind and hold ourselves true to. And one of the first ones was, of course, adhering to the RAM as much as possible. And I can say with confidence, although we get updates daily to check in on our numbers, that we're right there. I do believe we've got an online class that's a little bit over right now, but we're working on that with the building principal. So it's adhering to the RAM as much as possible. And again, confidently, we're there minus maybe one section. Health and safety was in consideration, not wanting our classes to get too large. And so even though we've got that RAM 5 level, we were certainly on the lookout for 31s and 32s across the district at that time. Another huge component for us is minimal staff and student disruption. And we talked about that a little bit last time at the board meeting, but even doing what we did, has its impact. And when you're taking 14 teachers from the online program, you think about the students that they are leaving behind who have to transition to another teacher. And then when they're coming on site, they are helping with the new numbers that they're seeing on site, but also that means they're relieving some other classrooms to make up that new classroom. So there's students impacted that maybe had an on-site teacher, now a new teacher's coming on site and they're having to shift over to balance out class sizes there. So that was definitely top of mind for us as well. And then of course, always the budget, trying to stay cost neutral in any of those decisions that we were making. When we closed enrollment down, we opened it for that 5-day period, and I'm not going to be exactly right, but I think that was around February 3rd, that evening that the enrollment closed. And then just to give you an idea of the late enrollment requests that we entertained up until February 15th, we were tracking them. Dr. Schultz did a nice job of putting out a form for us to help track those requests through the elementary principals and secretaries. And roughly, maybe we're at around 110. And so given that we're just in the middle of staffing, we made it work for all of those families. But as soon as the 15th came around, we knew we would still be getting requests. And It was just a matter of time. We use that same process then and have a secondary form working as well. And now any requests that we're getting as late enrollment requests still come in on a daily basis. We're asking the buildings to submit that and then tell us when the family wants that date effective. And what we're trying to go back to our families and say is that we will potentially entertain any of these requests as third trimester approaches again. There are a few exceptions for that are spelled out with to our secretaries and building administrators. So for example, we're still entertaining a COVID exception to go from on-site to online automatically. That's a COVID exception that's been in play all year long and was really dictated to us by the Department of Ed as well. Another factor is anybody that might be unfortunately homebound or find themselves with homeless status, so McKinney-Vento status. So, and then to come on site, those that we give immediate consideration to are any IEP teams that make a decision that the student should come immediately on site. And any of our McKinney-Vento families, again, our homeless families have that choice. So with that, I would entertain questions.
I know one other question that we fielded a couple times this week, just to answer out loud, would be, if there should be more site-based decision-making around some of those decisions rather than the district book, or how we balanced out the site-based decision-making. I'd say our principals are very familiar with the RAM and familiar with that concept and know what their parameters are, and will call us if they're close and know that if they've went above or over. But the problem with some of our online sections is it doesn't just affect one building, it affects potentially 2 or 3 buildings, or even 5 or 6 based on the students in those online sections. And so trying to collapse an online section can have huge cascading effects across the organization. And so that may sound like a solution that would make some sense about a principal being able to make the decision that's best for them or for their campus based on some of that space conversation we had earlier. But it doesn't just affect that one campus, it affects multiple ones that teacher may be serving students from different campuses in that online section. So I just thought I would put that out there for information for folks as well. But like Amy said, what questions might you have that we could answer yet tonight on staffing?
Sean, this is Charlie. I just want to kind of follow up a little bit on what Matt was describing. And I want to say, before I say anything else, that I definitely respect the work that Matt and Amy and all the staff are doing to come up with classroom staffing decisions that are the best we can achieve. So I'm not quarreling at all with any of the decisions that you have made. I was invited to come out to one of the elementary schools a week or so ago, or I think on the 15th actually. And the staff there talked with me, and I talked with them about their perspectives on their staffing situation. And I came away from that and talked to Matt about this, about giving ourselves the freedom to consider principal and staff decisions, input and observations and desires in terms of making our staff decisions. So again, I'm not suggesting anything other than that we go ahead and do, I think, what I've heard that we're doing now, and that is in working with principals on staffing decisions within each school and considering their input as well as our RAM model.
Yeah, exactly, Charlie. And I think we do consider that input from principals, and the pieces that aren't really negotiable, or when they're in a section of the RAM, I guess is the best way to say it, when they're in that portion of it, and they know their principles for that, their guiding principles for their staffing. They do have some autonomy about how to break out their sections or where to put some FTE, but their FTE is really determined by some of those section numbers and by the level of RAM they're in. So I do think we have good conversations on that. Unfortunately, we'd like to be able to answer every large class size scenario or be able to do more on the staffing end. I don't think any of us expected to make a transition in February to 100% learning, but it hasn't been an expected year in any fashion. And so really just commend the team for working together to pull that off and to do a major transition that, as I reminded you guys last week, usually is a process we begin January, February that ends all the way at the beginning of school in August. And we really sandwiched it into a 3-week time period. And so definitely not everything's perfect, but I do think we have good rapport and dialogue back, and we'll continue to have that as we move forward.
So am I correct that when we say we're meeting the RAM, it's because we've moved all the schools up to RAM level 5? Or
Not
we're
all
meeting,
schools
or
at
our RAM level 2 schools are meeting their RAM 2 goals, and 3 is at 3 and 4 is at 4? Can you guys clarify that for me?
That's accurate, Lisa.
Yeah. I would tell you that one thing I didn't share is I shared, that we're at a little over 100 of requests at the elementary level up to February 15th alone, somewhere in there. And today, just to show you the kind of movement or asks that we're getting, today we're up to 158 total. So that just shows you that the kind of the constant ask that's out there. And, Matt was alluding to how many times we've gone through the staffing process and these transitions. And, we'll typically do it once in the spring, and maybe a little bit of shifting come August when we see our actual numbers, they come to fruition. But, we're into our 4th time, and, we're going to have to make some decisions coming up here upon 3rd trimester, because I know some of these that are sitting in here are potentially going to impact class size, and we're just going to have to ask ourselves some tough questions again.
And I'm sorry, but I asked an or question, and then Matt, you said I was right, and I don't know which one I'm right about. Are we showing fidelity to each level of our RAM still, or?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. Sorry.
Yeah, each level of the RAM. So if it's whether they're RAM 2 or they're RAM 5, there's fidelity to all of those levels, like Amy said, outside of maybe that one section. And then the picture that Amy's painting there is that based on new requests that continue to come in, would bump, some of those sections potentially over, which then again creates that disruption scenario we've talked about before, because we don't have additional staff to potentially add. I mean, there's some creative solutions we would continue to try to look at, but that's kind of just the continual moving target as we go along.
I would just add this, internally, we talk about this enrollment challenge on quite a consistent basis, right? And we've got other enrollment processes and procedures in place that we adhere to, whether it's staffing via the RAM at the elementary level, honoring and understanding open enrollment request and the Iowa code to what's allowable, what's not, understanding intricately our voluntary transfer process, both at the elementary and secondary level, and adhering to that with fidelity, right? This has just been an extreme challenge, because it's really hard for us to not want to meet the needs of whatever the parent thinks is best for their student at that time, whether that's online or on site. And so it just makes this year incredibly challenging, and trying to keep it all in line and feel like you're being fair to everyone, staff, students, family. It's just been incredibly challenging.
Exactly right, Amy. It's hard on everybody, right? I mean, it's not the people just doing the scheduling, right? It's the parents, it's the kids that are, transitioning teachers, the parents that are having to form new relationships with new staff members and work with their child with the new staff member. It's the teachers receiving, a large group of kids into their classrooms. And so that's just where there's the multiple changes that creates the challenge. And so, yes, the staffing component's been a piece of the work, but there's also the relationship component that's a huge piece of the work for folks too, which is hard and taxing to continue to have change. But that's really our return to learn update. So if there are other questions on topics that we didn't cover, be happy to answer those or have a team member take a shot at those too. But those were the big highlights we wanted to give you this evening.
Pretty quiet there. I guess the only thing I was wanting to know is just kind of how the sense of how folks have felt the last, week and a half since all the kids back. I know that some of the students are very happy to be there. I think the nicer weather has helped everybody's mood a
I
little
was
bit.
gonna say, I think the 50 to 60 degree temperature change you talked about at the beginning is good for everybody's soul a little bit, Sean. So
I don't know, maybe it's a question for Brady. Had, you know, in the school every day, how does it feel?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think in talking with teachers, you know, this has probably been consistent since the summer. You know, we love teaching. You know, we love being with kids on site and having students in our classroom and, you know, having that energy in their smiles and being able to see their eyes and watch light bulbs go on figuratively. And, but I, you know, the paradox of it is there's also, you know, a lot of new procedures that you have to go through, and there's definitely concerns that you have for your students, and you sense, you know, and feel their anxiety about, you know, being around probably more people than they've been around as well in several months. I had students, you know, just say, gosh, I haven't been around this many people in a long time. And so I think, you know, if you talk to teachers, it's a little paradoxical. You know, it's the thing that we love probably to do more than anything, and it's the thing that also sits in our brains a little bit sideways. And you know, you have to be really, really careful, very safe. You have to follow all the protocols, and we have extensive protocols. We're very appreciative and thankful for the district's you know, efforts on health and safety, and it's mirrored out in the CDC guidelines. I mean, I think it's basically, you know, I joked with some of the people that I think they looked at what we were doing and said, yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's copy that for the reopening. So, but yeah, I think that's probably it. I mean, probably mixed emotions, but you know, it's sure nice to, you know, I love being in the classroom. I'll just speak personally. You know, it's really exciting to have, you know, students and to watch them learn. And, you know, you just have to be really intentional and very, very careful and, you know, about what you're doing, and, you know that we are still in a pandemic. So I'd say if that, you know, if that sums it up, it's probably where a lot of folks are at. We wish we could snap our fingers and have new, bigger buildings and classrooms. I mean, I think the answer to like go back to Charlie's, yeah, physical distancing it's hard. It just is. But that's underfunding. It's a lack of investment, you know, and we have an amazing community, and our community is certainly invested in our schools, but that's one of the consequences of state, you know, inadequate funding at the state level. So you can't snap your fingers and build new buildings and new classrooms that are bigger. So we do the best with what we've got and welcome students and work through the emotions that they have and that we have with our colleagues.
Thanks, Brady. I appreciate that. All right, directors, any other questions for Matt and the team, or are we ready to move along? I see a lot of stares at me, so I think we're ready to move along. So let's go ahead and move on to our next item, which is our equity update. Back to Matt.
Sure. I was just thinking you're much better on the Zoom wait time than I think I am in our cabinet meeting, thinking back to this morning. So good job on that, President Eystone. But yes, we have our equity update, our standing monthly update around the equity items, the 5 items we've committed to working on throughout this school year. The first 2 are a more brief update again. One is the ombudsperson position. Remember, we plan to have that person start for us here in March. And so we're excited to welcome Taj to the team and to get him underway and have him meet you guys just as soon as he's here in the district and ready to go. The other one's the evaluation standard that we plan to work or are working on with the ICA for our teachers, leaders, and staff in that regard. And I think just one maybe special note of that, because every once in a while we get some questions that bubble up about, isn't this already in the Iowa teaching standards, or isn't this in the leadership standards that you guys have? And it is. But I think a piece we'd want to send special note to here in Iowa City is that we know our expectations are high in that area, and that we want to hold ourselves to a high bar and a high standard in that regard. And so I think we want to have special attention drawn to that, and know that that's a practice we're continuing to improve upon, and that the district has great commitment in that work, and that we're all going to be challenged to continue to work on our skill set and improve in that area. So we will have that to you before the end of the year, like we've stated before. We don't have anything ready to present on that end yet, but that is collaborative work we will do, and we will have a product on before the end of the year, and then an implementation plan on that for the next academic school year. So With that, the other three items I'm going to ask Amy to walk you through with her team around the discipline protocols and procedures, the PBIS and Rethinking Discipline Group, the social studies curriculum review process that's going on, and then our monthly professional development opportunities. So with that, I'll kick it over to Amy.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to take the professional development piece tonight because Laura Gray's not with us. She's getting to do a little bit of celebrating. So good for her. Our professional development related to cultural proficiency in February, we had to put a pause on. We actually took the opportunity to host a webinar for our staff. That was right ahead of our 100% on-site transition. So Laura took her PD that she was going to do that day, and we are going to offer that or share that with staff as mandatory PD at the end of March. So more information to come on culturally responsive teaching strategies, cultural proficiency continuum, that'll be forthcoming. And we do have 3 PD sessions still ahead of us related to that work, March and April and May. So we'll, at our next update, be able to share more specifics on that. I'll also take the PBIS and Rethinking School discipline work. And, you know, I've been reporting out on this item each time, but I just have to just give a strong shout out to 3 members in particular on our team, Laura Daly and her department, Kate Callahan and her department, and then Laura Gray and her department. This has really been great work. And oftentimes, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, we find ourselves working in silos in our departments, but this is one that's really cross departments, and we're excited about the work. Appreciate Jeremy Tabor on the call as part of that work group. Rathina's been part of our work group. Lisa Williams has stepped in a couple of times. And so I appreciate all the people that have come and listened, learned, given input on this. And last night we held our 7th meeting, if you can believe that. It came to you in November, kind of painting the picture of where we're going to head with 10 meetings with that work group. And we'll finish out that work in March, but honestly, it's work that will continue, you know, as long as any of us on this call are here. It's good work. It's been fulfilling work. And again, it's just been great to have all the departments working together on this. And closely working with, of course, Rachel Maller at U of I, and then Dr. Bruck now with the University of Delaware. The last couple of meetings, we invested time in looking at the DPP. We went into different breakout rooms, asked group members to take a look for any bias in the language specific to the behavioral infraction area of the DPP. We did that the last couple of times. Last evening, we weren't ready to share any updated changes in the language just yet. We wanted to give ourselves a little bit more time. The other piece that we've been doing is so thinking about the feedback and thinking about, you know, we're focused kind of on the behavior infractions, but what are all the proactive things that we need to be doing to prevent somebody from the student finding themselves in a position where they have an office referral or, you know, are in a situation where that action might end up in suspension. And so what we've done with the work group, as well as with our set of elementary administrators and instructional coaches, as well as our secondary admins, a group of secondary admins, and a few people at their building level, is really taking them through a process of, you know, what do we want our students to know in the area of social emotional behavioral learning? How are we going to know if they've learned it? How do we identify kids that have needs, how are we going to support them? And then what are those supports that we can offer back to students once we identify a need? And then when we're not identifying needs, you know, where do our celebrations land? And so we've done some activity over with those 3 different groups, and we've brought some different frameworks back to 2 of those 3 groups. And one of those groups happened was last night. So we painted a picture of that framework for the group. So where we're headed with all of this is, when we want to focus on, you know, where we can make the greatest impact, it's really trying to help paint the picture of what we are doing in the district around social emotional behavioral health. But we also know some key components that can be added, layered in there. And this is the work that we're trying to do to paint how it all connects, is the work that we've been doing around culturally responsive teaching strategies, and then restorative practices. And we had a little bit of this conversation, or it was a little bit part of that listening session that we had with the board back in January. So Laura shared bits and pieces early on, just a real short presentation around restorative practices. Then 2 meetings ago, she had a little bit more time to do so and went more in depth. And then last night she invited Dr. Demita Brown, who formerly was a U of I grad student, and Laura got to meet her in Iowa City. And now she's doing work with Madison Public School District and specifically with one of their high schools there. So she was invited to share a little bit of her work last night, and then there was a little bit of time for Q&A. So just trying to build some background in what restorative practices looks like, what other districts have experienced in it, what could the bridge be between what we're doing now to where we want to be with restorative practices. So as we head into March with those last 3 meetings, the work group is going to hear about restorative practices in each of those 3 sessions. They're going to see the updated language and a first draft, that first meeting in March. They're going to see more of a build out around our social emotional behavioral supports and a build out of a publication, that second meeting in March. And then that 3rd meeting in March, and each time they'll have opportunities to respond to the drafts. And that 3rd meeting in March, we're going to bring it together as the final copy. And then we'd like to bring that to the board sometime in April. Let's see, I took 2 of those items. I'm going to ask Brady or Diane or Nick to talk about the social studies update, and then we can take questions.
Yep, maybe I think I'm doing that one. I'd be remiss too if I didn't circle back to the earlier question from President Eystone and just really give heartfelt thank you to Chase and Kristen and that team, and then the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. They, with great humility, I think that all of the educators in the district have accepted the opportunity, or many have accepted the opportunity to get a vaccine, and that really is game changing. And UIHC has just done a tremendous work in our community, as has Johnson County Public Health and other health providers. But I think that really, in addition to nice weather, and obviously much more significantly, getting the ability to get the vaccine if you want it has been tremendous. So I just can't thank UIHC and Suresh enough for the work that they did in making that happen. In terms of social studies curriculum review, we had our second self-study team meeting on March 17th. So last week, we, as planned, evaluated data around things like the survey results. We looked at some AP test scores and enrollment figures and retention figures around our AP programs, because we have some academic achievement data we can look at. We took a look at the Iowa Core social study standards, our curricular units, as well as our scope and sequence. We worked in teams to identify limitations of the program, as well as strengths of the program, and then used the limitations of the program to begin to develop a recommended plan of action that would be implemented across the next 8 years, with, of course, some immediate steps happening, this summer. Or even late spring for changes to the programs based on the limitations that the group has identified. Probably one of the biggest themes that has emerged. And then we have one more meeting after that where we'll work to finalize, the recommended plan of action, and then that would be what we present to the board. And probably one of the biggest takeaways, not surprisingly, is the need for updated materials that are more that support culturally responsive teaching, as well as a request for professional development that builds on the work that we're doing in the district currently, but that is tailored more toward social studies classrooms in particular. And I think that's a really good request coming. I think that's going to be something that where we can take the continuum work that Amy talked about and drill that down a little bit more into the social studies classroom. We've started the process of evaluating some curricular materials in conjunction with Laura Gray and her department, and the cultural proficiency team, a subcommittee of that team, has been working on curriculum review. And so they've been taking a look at some of the materials that we've been able to get a hold of and give us their feedback. We wanted to start with them. We feel like they're really our gatekeeper. If it isn't something that they feel okay with, we're just really not that interested as a district, frankly, in maybe moving, further down the road with the materials. So that's sort of the update. That's where that's where I've got a tremendous team of people, working on it. We'll have a meeting in late March, and then with the possibility, if we need more time before the end of the school year, we can pull that team back together.
Maybe I'll ask if you guys have questions on any of those items. There is one other item we wanted to cover under the equity update tonight before we transition to that one. If there's questions for Brady on social studies or any of the other items we've covered.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Sean, I had a couple of things maybe, if you don't mind. Amy, could you just go over about how many staff you think so far we've been able to have go through the professional development under cultural competency training that we've been offering?
Yeah, that's a great question, Charlie. We're not keeping data on that. I mean, it is mandatory and required that they attend. So it would be all of our, certified teachers and administrators, and not saying everybody's making it every time, but we do bill it as required.
Okay. So, but do you have some idea about about what percentage of the total teaching staff we have that have had an opportunity to do these sessions? Is that right? So by the end of the year, we'll know about where we are in terms of our total of training effect.
Yeah, so it should have been all teaching staff, I think is what Amy's trying to say there, Charlie. So all are invited and required really to attend those every month. And so unless a staff member's been ill that day in a teacher or leadership capacity, they would be at that PD. And so that would be the thing. I'm just not sure we have maybe attendance data on that, but at the same time, that's the event for the afternoon. And so that's what all the teachers or administrators are doing. So really, as far as the data goes around that, we really see that as all of our teachers and administrators attending that every time.
Okay, thanks. And then Amy, to the discipline work, I think you indicated you're anticipating bringing something to us in April that we can take a look at in terms of changes to the way we're doing office referrals and suspensions.
Yeah.
And that, okay, sorry, go ahead.
I'll finish what you're saying, Charlie. Sorry.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to look ahead and indicate that I guess I would be looking for an indication of your final work about how we're going to know if what changes we're making are actually affecting our disproportionality, and when that's occurring, and when it's at what rate that might be occurring. So if that's part of your overall eventual product, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we lead with the slides about, why we're doing this, why we're embarking on the work. And we started with that work group by revisiting our climate and culture data, our U of I climate culture data, as well as our data around office discipline referrals, as well as suspensions. And, this is the work that we're doing. Not all of our students and across ICCSD are experiencing the same kind of environment based on, results that we're getting. And we need to do something that's transformative, that's going to change the culture. I pick on Matt, and he says something oftentimes, and that's, if we can't get at the culture, everything else that we're doing has diminishing returns. And I don't think that you could state that any more eloquently than when he says that. I think that's true. And so when we're talking about things like social emotional behavioral supports and work, and identifying kids that need support, and then just transforming the overall culture, we really think that restorative justice is potentially, one of those big pieces, along with lots of other pieces that can potentially do it. But it's going to take professional development. It's going to take an appetite, not only from our staff, it's going to take appetite from the community to do things in a different way. And so we really are going to have to spend the time building background, not only from that work group perspective, but community-wide, definitely within our staff, to understand that this has the potential to really transform our culture.
Okay, thanks very much, Amy.
I had a quick question on the curriculum, the social studies curriculum, and I think it's a quick question. I'm wondering, is I think the push, right, is to kind of infuse things throughout the entire curriculum, but is there also a chunk of looking at new curriculum, new classes, or is there, I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe break down like a percent of how much is throughout the whole curriculum versus new classes, something like that?
Yeah, yeah, thanks. That's a good question. Both are happening. One of the things that came through in the survey and then some of the discussions of the self-study team was a request to examine both our scope and sequence across K-12, probably more 7-12. K-6 is pretty prescribed by the state. And then also to look at some, potential elective offerings or, complementary required offerings that could run alongside things in our U.S. history strand. So there has been that, and that would be something that a subsequent team would, sort of take a look at as well. In addition to, of course, the infusion of a more culturally responsive approach to teaching as well as curriculum materials throughout. So both are happening. I'm not sure what the outcome of the scope and sequence conversation would be, but it's certainly the opportunity is there to really have a serious conversation about what additional electives or replacement requirement courses that we might be able to offer.
Okay, thanks, Brady. Any other questions on that before Matt takes the next point? Go for it, Matt.
Okay, all right. The next one that we wanted to include through our equity update tonight was around our puberty and health curriculum. And so I think I'm turning that one right over to Diane to update you guys kind of on where we're at on that and where we're going.
Thanks, Matt. I had asked Matt and Amy if I could just share as part of our equity update, our continued work on our health curriculum. As you know, the board adopted a strong commitment statement to our LGBTQ students, and we have administrative guidelines that are related to that statement. And one of those pieces in that guidelines really asked us to look at our health curriculum and make sure that it was taught in a way that was non-binary and that was inclusive of all students, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. So we have been looking at our curriculum. At the secondary level, we've been working with UAY. We have staff coming from UAY and from our VAP who come into our health classes, and they teach a very inclusive health curriculum to our students that covers a wide range of sexual health. At our elementary, we still had some practices in some of our elementary schools where we were separating students, boys in one room, girls in the other, when we were teaching puberty. And we know that that's just not a practice that's inclusive of everyone. So we've asked our teachers to be more inclusive with our students, make sure that we're not segregating them. And then we are looking at our curriculum. Our current elementary health curriculum in the area of puberty was very binary. So we have a small team that's been looking at other curricula that was recommended to us from UAY. It's called the 3 R's curriculum: rights, respect, and responsibility. It's from the Advocates for Youth. And it is a much more inclusive curriculum. So we are in the process right now of developing lessons, training our guidance counselors to be supportive of that curriculum being taught, but it will be taught by our classroom teachers in grades 4, 5, and 6 later this spring. And as always, anytime we teach human growth and development curriculum, we do make parents aware of that ahead of time. We send letters home and we let them know that if they want to review the curriculum, they're welcome to do so.
So unless you guys have questions, that was our complete update for that topic, but thanks for that, Diane.
Thanks, Diane. Directors, any questions on that? I think it's important.
I don't have any questions. I don't have any questions, Sean. I just like to commend this all the staff for giving us these updates, for continuing this work, and other board members for continuing to want to continue this work. So.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, I think now is the time we have to stand firm as lots of things are happening, in Des Moines, and to try and, I don't know, tear down people. And it's frustrating. So I'm glad that our district and this group of folks right here is pretty steadfast in, who we are and what we stand for. And so I appreciate all of that work that's being done. If there are no more questions on that, I think we can go ahead and move on. We do have one action item. I don't know if Matt or Les is gonna kind of talk through a little bit of this, or.
I think Les would like to do this one, so I'll let Les take this one and talk.
That sounded more like Matt wants Les to take this one.
Well, of course that too, but yeah, no, Les is gonna handle this one for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, directors. In front of you is the budget guarantee resolution, or as it's officially called, the regular program budget adjustment. And if you recall, at our work session back in January, we previewed the need to do this pending where the legislature set the final SSA amount. And now that that 2.4% rate is set, the district will still be subject to this budget guarantee amount to maintain the 1% growth in our regular program budget for fiscal year 22. What this resolution does is gives the authorization to include those property taxes in our levy. That levy right now is projected to be about 8 cents because of the budget guarantee. Without this, it would cost the district about $640,000 of resources that we would never get back by not approving the resolution. And I know that sounds like I'm putting our backs against the wall, but frankly, that's what the budget guarantee does do in the year in which you're able to pass this. So with that, I'd answer any other questions that you might have. You may have heard various comments when they were comparing the House and the Senate versions about how many districts across the state were going to be added to budget guarantee this year. And while I don't have those numbers exactly off the top of my head, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 to 140 districts that were added to budget guarantee for fiscal year 22 because of the declining enrollments across the state, and then the SSA rate set at such a rate that did not allow those districts to recover significantly with their budget. So
was that 8 cents per 100,000?
Per 1,000.
Per 1,000. I was gonna say, that sounds like nothing. Okay, per 1,000. All right, thank you.
The rate is always per 1,000 evaluation, taxable valuation.
And we can only do this for 1 year, right, Les?
Yeah, this is just a 1 year time. There may be other years in the future if we would have a budget decline that we would have to be able to come back to it. But in my 27 years in ICCSD, it's the first time we've used it. So while that says something about the state of our district and our continual upward growth and enrollment, it also tells you about the change in the pattern. The state of Iowa was down about 6,000 districts or students across the state. That's parsed out to just under 1,000 in Des Moines, to our 287, to very small changes in across the state. I was just looking earlier this afternoon, and of the top 25 enrollment districts in the state, only 3 of those 25 actually had an increase, and a couple of those were like 6. So that's pretty minimal on 4,000 students. So.
And so that's what we've talked through that budget planning process too, right? Is that we anticipate that enrollment to recover. We don't think that the state just lost 6,000 kids. Now, do we know the level of recovery that we'll see in enrollment? No, I think that's still the question out there. But we do know when we did an enrollment and analysis throughout the year about kindergarten, preschool, and some students that just didn't show for this year, or that potentially went a private school option route. All of those things are a culmination of factors, but 6,000 students just didn't vanish from the state. And so we will regain some of those students. I think just to what level is going to be the big question. But so hopefully this isn't a repetitive scenario for us here in Iowa City, like Les said, with 27 years of continual growth. Knowing that we're in the middle of a pandemic explains a lot about why we're in this situation we're in right now.
I don't have any question. I think I'll take this opportunity to, I'm certainly going to vote to support this, but it's extremely frustrating that folks in Des Moines who ostensibly are against raising taxes have money to spend, and they're forcing districts into the situation. So we pass this on to our property tax payers. And I just hope folks kind of recognize that, the public recognizes that, because they're really tying our hands here in a year when their rainy day fund is full and they could spend down that. And if it's not raining during a global pandemic, I don't know when it's raining. Again, I fully support this. It's absolutely something we need to do, but I certainly am frustrated that our hands are tied and that, like Les said, our back is to the wall.
I would say too that I'm definitely going to vote in favor of this. I just wanted to ask Les. Les, I was looking at the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester enrollment head counts that Matt had provided us, I think, and I think sent to some journalists too. And our overall head count from the first trimester counting period to the third is increased by about 60 something students. So is that an indication that the enrollment decline overall that we saw at the first of the year may be more fleeting than, or maybe as fleeting as we anticipate it will be?
I'll jump in and let Les see if he's got something he'd want to add on there. But, in a typical year, we would see some continual growth throughout the school year too, Charlie. So that wouldn't be abnormal for us to do an October 1st count date. That's actually a piece of legislation in Des Moines too about multiple count dates potentially being upon school districts in the future, because our October 1st count date would typically be lower than the students we end up serving in the spring. And so there's some usual growth that happens during that year, but I think, like you said, seeing an increase of that 60 is a positive sign for us to see that, whether it's because they're coming back or whether it's true growth to the area. But Les, if you have anything else you want to add on there, go ahead.
No, Matt, I would just concur that that is a sign of some recovery in our enrollment growth, that it's a consistent pattern that we experience year over year with our head counts to go up during the year. Just as a reminder, from a budgetary perspective, we have to anchor on October 1st each year for the certified budget and base everything for the next year based upon that. And Adam and I have been working actually on just a way to actually project what this enrollment growth might be, or more precisely, what enrollment recovery might be. And it's extremely difficult. If we had that crystal ball, we'd all be much better shape, but that would answer a lot of questions for us in a lot of different areas if we knew what that was going to do. But we're continuing to monitor that, continuing to work through those projections. And Nick and Amy are challenged by these numbers as well, because we need to look at what we're going to staff on August 23rd of 2021. And what those numbers mean. And so, while I'm focusing on the budget tonight and on our April 13th, when we certify the budget, we're working together throughout the team to figure out what these numbers mean as we move forward.
Any other questions from directors on that? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
I move that we approve the budget guarantee resolution for the fiscal year 21-22 budget.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, Kim, I'm ready to vote.
Online voting is open.
I'm an aye vote, Kim.
Thank you. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, so next up is our agenda setting. And you'll see on there that there is an operations committee meeting. And that's weird to think that next week is March already. it is, so be it. And then we will have a meeting, a regular board meeting the week after on the 9th. There's nothing too crazy on there. Looks like all our regular stuff, including our newly added operations committee update, you know, after the committee meeting the week prior, our return to learn update and all of the usual suspects. So it's another light agenda. Are there things that folks would like to add?
Can we just get an update, since we would have had the first meeting for the portrait of a graduate, just how, you know, that went?
Definitely. And just a reminder, you know, to the community, our first portrait of design team meeting is tomorrow night. And so we're excited to kick off that work. And I think that'd be a great time to update the board on how that meeting went and what we're able to accomplish that evening.
And I got to give a little mea culpa here. I haven't been paying attention to every bill out of Des Moines because there's so many. I know we were waiting on our continued discussion on secondary transfer policy based on some of the bills that were going on in Des Moines. Are we still waiting to hear how that plays out, or if some of those moved through? Or
I think we're still in a holding pattern on that one, Sean. That's part of that larger omnibus bill. And so we're still waiting on that one. Yeah.
That's moved through the Senate, is in the House right now. Is that where it's at?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't think it's made it out of committee in the House yet to the floor for full debate, but Brady might know a better detail about that than me, but
He was nodding.
Understanding.
Yeah, they're gonna, I mean, the indications potentially from the House is are that they're gonna split it into component parts. That's been sort of the conversation the last several days. I think they're struggling to get the whole thing through. So there's been an indication that they might split out there's 7 or 8 sections to the omnibus bill and then move those through one at a time. That would speed some of them along, obviously, more quickly.
Any,
Sean,
Charlie?
I'd add kind of blunderingly here. We have a bid opening for the track property or the Roosevelt building property that will be occurring before this meeting or after this meeting?
It's
opens before that.
Yeah, the opening is actually going to be at 4 o'clock on Tuesday, the 2nd. And so we actually bumped operations committee to 4:30 that night to allow us to do those bids first. So if you're looking for an update, Charlie, we could definitely provide an update at that following meeting.
Well, I was just going to ask if there's anything we need to do agenda setting wise in regards to that receiving those bids or not. If we don't need to take any steps now, that's fine.
We'll get that added. Yep, I made a note of that, Charlie. We'll get that on there.
Okay, thank you.
One other thing that maybe if I could jump in with Sean, if that's okay, the calendars we've talked about a couple of times. We may have a revised calendar for next school year for you guys to look at based on some of that conversation we had around Eid. And so we're getting close, I think, to having something ready. That might not be ready for the March meeting, but potentially the second March meeting. So we'll create a placeholder for that if that's okay and bring it to you at one of those times.
Sounds good. All right, I'm looking around, see if anybody else wants to jump in. All right. If not, I guess I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Lots of ayes. All right, go enjoy the warmth while you can.
Good night, everybody. See you in
Night.
2 weeks.
Take care. Good night.